everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Human School's Curation Corner, one part of our learning journey here at the Human School. I'm Randy.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Chad.
In each of our Curation Corner episodes, we engage in brief conversations focused on a specific resource. First, we summarize the author's ideas, then we make connections to our own experiences, and finally, we share insights and some additional questions that you can take into your own learning. In this episode, we're chatting about the article, The Call for Educational Transformation by Annalise Smitzman, PhD. If you happen to be interested in the actual article, you can find a link below this video at thehuman.school. All right, so I'll try and do this as briefly as possible because this is a hugely dense article. And it's actually one in a series of many articles around a blueprint, something called the R3.0 Transformational Blueprint. And the 3 R's stand for redesign, resilience, and regeneration. And like I said, it's a hugely dense article. So I just want to pull out a couple of main ideas that the 3 of us can chat about. And hopefully our audience will be at least intrigued by some of the ideas. So the first idea is this idea of regeneration, which they identify as the act of healing, improving, and enhancing a place, system, or relationship. And they make this point that regeneration is in tension with the current dominant economic system. So this idea that we've got 2 systems here that are in disagreement or challenging each other. And I think that's really important for our work because this idea that we've got systems that are just so closely integrated. And when we try and change one of them, it's like a Rubik's Cube. We can't quite move it right without changing some other things in the system. Another point that they make regarding regeneration is that regeneration should be a primary concern for education, and that this will require an ethic of care and stewardship. And one of the things, the last thing that I'll share is that the article has many, many interesting questions. And the one question that I connected with has to do with, I think, this idea of mindsets and how we need to change the way that we think. And the question that they ask is, how does what we learn and how we learn catalyze the required personal as well as collective transformations of our assumptions, habits, attitudes, and actions? So that's just a couple of pieces from the article. Let me make a couple quick connections and then we'll open it up. So I think the main thing here that excites me is that it's being an ejector. It's challenging assumptions, habits, attitudes, and actions about all kinds of systems, specifically the education system, but that it's intertwined with these other systems. And the one that they particularly bring to light is the economic system. The other connection that I want to talk about is this idea of the mind shift navigating from ignoring the future to embracing the future. And clearly in the article, she is asking us to think long-term, to take the long view around this idea of regeneration, that we're reaching a critical point in the history of humanity. And if we want to correct it, we have to have this regenerative culture. So a couple of connections that I made to a really interesting, deep, complex, but fascinating article. How about you guys?
So one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading the article, especially with the idea of regenerating and the economic conversation, was with the way that I remember learning about recycling when I was in elementary school. And, we talked about the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle, but I remember focusing most on recycling. And even now, there's recycling bins and there's recycling trucks that come and get it. But the conversation isn't as much on the reuse and reduce conversation. So I'm wondering what the economic piece of that is. What's the influence in how we are socialized or how we are supported in believing what the value of recycling versus reduction and reuse. And, what would that look like in classrooms if that was sort of revised, like if we taught students about all three and then really focused on all three, what would reuse and reduce look like in classrooms as well as part of that conversation, in terms of shifting mindsets around the regeneration and the stewardship, environmental stewardship.
One of the things that I really loved, they've got this wonderful graphic in the article that highlights what they call their 7 learning perspectives, and I find them really compelling. And I think they align very well to some of our thinking. They talk about learning as contextual, learning as context, learning as life, learning as future, learning as agency, learning as connection, learning as story, and learning as community. And if I were to kind of map those 7 learning perspectives with some of our mind shifts, there's really strong connection there. So that was really exciting for me to kind of see how these pieces were connected, but there's new insights in those. For example, their learning as connection perspective is really about not just about how we as humans connect, but how we as humans connect with machines, and how we connect with nature. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And in fact, all 7 of those learning perspectives actually have their own articles or white papers. And so I'm really looking forward to digging much deeper into that. As Randy said, very, very rich article and thinking. And then, as I was thinking about the connections to our work, I mean, Randy mentioned this earlier, they're very much in alignment with embracing the future, that we've got to be thinking about, where we're going to be. And they asked these really wonderful questions. One was around formal and informal education supports and structures, and whether they're preparing people to envision our future potential as a civilization that is centered on ecology by design and being human or life-centered. And so really kind of an interesting framework and thinking there. And then I think another thing that I really connected with is that they talk about the collective transformations of our assumptions, habits, attitudes, and actions through both a personal and a systemic lens. And one of the things that I think we've been kind of grappling with at the Human School is that many of us want to change the systems and structures. But the miss might be that we don't focus on, the personal change that is required for the system to change. And vice versa, there are places where there's all this personal development and growth, but there's not a lot of attention paid to how that personal growth can lead to systemic change. And so I thought it was really interesting that they really declare that to be the goal. And I think that's been exemplified in our conversations around the use of language like human and humanity, that, yes, the ultimate goal is to create structures and systems that, improve humanity, but it starts with the individual human. And so we've chosen to use both pieces of that language intentionally. So I don't know, there's a lot there. I apologize if I kind of droned on, but those would be the connections I made.
Not at all. So with these conversations, we not only want to put the author's ideas out there and put our ideas out there, what do we bring to the text, but then we want to come up with some sort of insight or some path of thinking that the combining of the author's insights and our own take us down. So my insight from reading this article was focusing on this idea of success. So currently we're defining success as basically a competition for scarce amount of resources, climb the ladder, you'll receive status and wealth as a result of that. And that model of success isn't regenerative. It's extracting. It's hoarding resources, basically. He who has the most wins. And, if we're going to have this sort of regenerative culture that we want to build, we have to redefine what we mean by success. And it can't be that extracted kind of model anymore. It has to look different. And I'm not sure what that looks like, but I think that's one of my insights, one of my takeaways.
Well, Randy, what I immediately connected to there is, kind of the focus on capitalism seems to be ground or framed around the idea that there's only so much to go around, right? So it's, a very I don't have the right language right now, but again, it's this idea that there's a defined amount and there's not enough for everybody, and we just have to figure out how to carve it up the best possible way. And when you think about learning, it doesn't have to be driven by this idea. It's not scarce, right? So education, learning, information, knowledge, wisdom, it doesn't have to be scarce. And so the system that we currently live in educationally is a reflection, sadly, of the culture and the value that we bring here in the States, which is that we're driven by this kind of zero-sum game. So I think you're right. This idea of regeneration is kind of antithetical to the values that we seem to operate on socially as it relates.
As I'm reading, I was thinking about the notion of transformation in general and what transforming education looks like. And so often, unfortunately, as we learn and we change, Olga Joshi Hansen talked about the way that we treat things like the DEI initiatives, that we just sort of like bolt things on to a system that doesn't exactly fit with what we're going for. So in the conversations around ecological future and stewardship, what about the system might need to shift in order for that to happen so that we can truly transform versus just attach another thing to it and have it not work? I mean, similar to what Chad just said, you have a structure and a system that sees everything for scarcity and deficit and competition. And so community and stewardship and communal are sort of antithetical to that. So what does it look like to transform, and what parts do we need to transform personally and systemically in order to allow that to happen? Otherwise, it's going to be doomed to fail, like most kind of adjustments that have been made in education, that as a system doesn't change, that, the ways that we are trying to change around it aren't really holding.
All right. So as usual, a great conversation. Let's wrap it up with a couple of questions that we all pulled together around this particular resource that we chatted about this week. First question, what are the mindsets necessary for intentionally inventing a new system built for regeneration and thriving? Second question, what might it look like and feel like to shift from focusing on the individual to focusing on the collective? And who decides what is the collective? And lastly, how might our paradigm shift if we focus on the 7 learning perspectives that are presented in the article? Learning as context, life, future, agency, connection, story, and community. And lots of words there that sort of permeate throughout this idea of the human school. All right, that's it. Thanks, everybody, for learning alongside us on this episode of the Human School's Curation Corner. If you want, you can visit thehuman.school and its Learning Hub public hub for additional resources, and you can join the conversation in our Facebook community committed to placing humanity at the center of all design. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye, guys.